A man used Snapchat to kill his ex-girlfriend. This case will make you think twice about keeping Snapchat on your phone. It was November 2022 in Nebraska. 43-year-old Carrie Allen vanished. She'd been last seen by her house on the 19th of the month. Now, this was incredibly disturbing as Carrie actually had a teenage son, and she would never just leave without telling him where she was going and when she was going to be back. She had recently split up with her boyfriend, Aldrich Scott. Strangely, after her disappearance, he vanished too. After police did some digging, it was later determined that he'd actually fled the country. Now, this was very suspicious, and police then unearthed some disturbing information. It was revealed that Aldrich had found out his ex was on a date at a restaurant and then used her Snapchat location to track where she was. He followed her and drove from Topeka to Omaha, where he waited for her to return. There, he shot her. Her body was tragically found in a shallow grave. After initially being charged with her kidnapping, he was later charged with her murder. He was recently found guilty and sentenced to a life in prison.
These are pictures that'll make you feel uneasy, part 4. Up first is this photo. And it's a photo of a person who has no fingernails. This photo completely looks photoshopped and fake, but it's not. Something about this is just super unsettling because it looks like the fingers are suffocating. This just doesn't look normal. Next up, this 73-year-old woman found out she was carrying a mummified fetus for the past 35 years. Meaning she was carrying around a dead baby in her body for 35 years without having any clue of it. I don't even know what to think about this. Next up is a picture of a huge spider carrying a piece of bacon. This family was having breakfast one day when they suddenly spotted a spider on the wall carrying one of the pieces of bacon they just made. I can't believe this is real, and this is making me hate spiders even more. Next up is a picture of a hand that was submerged in water for way too long. There's nothing wrong with the little wrinkles after being in water for a decent amount of time, but after being in water for this long, it looks super weird. And very unsettling to look at. It looks like some sort of fungus. Next up is a picture of an abandoned building, which, keep in mind, has been abandoned for years. Had a light showing on one of the top floors. Nobody explores this building really, especially on a floor that high up. So what is it? Do you think it's a ghost?
The next moments of that video that I just showed you depict the death of a man named Gordon Smiley. Gordon Smiley was an American race car driver killed on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So at the time of this qualifying event, Gordon was a rising star in the world of racing. He was known for his speed, for his kind of reckless driving, and he was highly unpredictable in his races. But in 1982, Gordon wanted to qualify for the Indianapolis 500. This is actually a photo taken only minutes before that fatal crash. So on May 15, 1982, Gordon set out to try and qualify. Gordon completed a warm-up lap, but it was during his second warm-up lap when disaster struck. So as he was coming around the third turn, Gordon's car began to oversteer, causing the car to slide. Gordon then steered right to try and correct this oversteering, but his wheels suddenly gained grip, which sent his car speeding directly across the track and into the wall nose first at around 200 miles per hour. The fuel tank on the car exploded, the whole thing nearly disintegrated, and Gordon's exposed body was then sent barreling into the catch fence. Gordon was pronounced dead at the scene, and it's said that he died almost immediately from these traumatic injuries. And in the year 2000, almost 20 years later, he was inducted into the Nebraska Racing Hall of Fame. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This is why you should never play Red Door, Yellow Door. Okay, so Red Door, Yellow Door is a scary paranormal game that people play at sleepovers. One person acts as a guide and puts you into a trance and leads you through doors and rooms in your mind. But beware, it's extremely sinister and scary. And you're not supposed to encounter any people, especially all black figures. And the video I'm about to show you shows two girls playing Red Door, Yellow Door, when the one in the trance sees an all black figure in one of the rooms, and they both begin freaking out. Here's the video, and whatever you do, never play this game.
Pretty much. So, do you hear anything? No. Go towards the light more. Go, more, in the center of the kitchen? Yes. Alright, I'm in the center now. It's now it's neon white. I'm in a totally different room now. It's all white. All white? Is there anyone with you? No. Wait, this dude. Is this all playing black man? Are you okay? Are you okay? What? Are you okay? Yeah. Are you alive? Yeah. It was an all playing black man? Are you serious? Are you joking? No. Oh my god. He was in the game. Okay. Are you okay? What? No. Oh god. You're fine. You're fine.
North Dakota woman pleads guilty to fatally poisoning her boyfriend with antifreeze to collect a large inheritance. The woman behind me is 47-year-old Ina Kenoyer. When they asked her why she poisoned him, she said that he was going to break up with her after he inherited his $30 million. Obviously, she wanted a slice. Also, these two had been dating for over 10 years. On September 3rd, Stephen Riley and some of his friends went to the airport to meet with an attorney and finalize a deal, and he started to feel a little bit funny. He felt super ill and couldn't walk. His friends got really concerned. However, she said it was just a heat stroke and he'd be fine. Heat strokes are still pretty fatal though. He was found unconscious the next day and then died shortly after. Apparently she put green antifreeze inside of his tea. I'm assuming he had matcha or some sort of green tea. But on May 29th, she did plead guilty and she really didn't even care that she pled guilty. She stated she's pretty indifferent to the situation, but she will be sentenced now in August. I couldn't find the sentence she's getting. I assume it's going to be like at least 30 years, probably life. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
This Doctor Strange star is a convicted pedophile. So let's talk about this. Meet Zara Fithian. I think that's how you say her name. She is a martial artist who's been in a lot of movies, and she's well known in Hollywood for her ability to fight. I'm assuming that's one of the reasons why she was cast in the 2016 film Doctor Strange to star alongside Benedict Cumberbatch. And if you've seen the movie, you might recognize her. She played a sorceress in the film. But it's always the case with somebody that looks the most normal from the outside that there's something dark and twisted going on internally. And that definitely is what happened here with Zara. Just last year in 2022, Zara and her husband, along with 3 other men, were convicted of essaying a child repeatedly over a period of 3 years. In total, there were 14 sex offenses that she was convicted of, and the child in question that she was convicted of assaulting was only 13 years old. She was a 13-year-old girl. So the young girl, who's now an adult, told the court that between 2005 and 2008, she was abused about 20 times by the couple and these men, and that sometimes these encounters were videotaped and kept for private pleasure, if you know what I mean. They were producing CP with this girl. So the judge was actually pretty harsh with the couple and all of the people involved in this case, and stated that they were very, very disappointed that instead of taking any sort of accountability for their actions, they tried to lie their way out of this. But there was a lot of evidence in this case, a lot of stuff that I can't talk about here on TikTok. And yeah, this is such a disturbing story, and it makes me wonder how many other actors, actresses, people involved in filmmaking have done these things that we just don't know about yet.
These are the most disturbing X-ray images, and this is a massive trigger warning. This is Los Angeles builder Victor Benavides. And one day, he was repairing a roof when he fell backwards holding onto a nail gun. The nail gun then went off and shot a few nails randomly. Victor didn't feel anything at first, but suddenly his mouth started to fill up with a lot of blood. He then felt around his mouth with his tongue, and to his surprise, he noticed something metal in the roof of his mouth. He then got an x-ray, and the x-ray then revealed that a 3.5-inch nail had shot up into the roof of his mouth and embedded itself in his skull, missing his brain by a millimeter, which would have been fatal. The nail was extracted, and Victor had no long-lasting health problems. And according to some sources, he's back at work and using the same exact nail gun. Can you imagine how lucky Victor had to feel? This nail missed his brain by a millimeter and would have easily ended his life if it missed his brain. This is absolutely crazy, but just wait for the next one. Next, in November 2008 in Australia, 2 boys were canoeing down the Georges River when they suddenly spotted a dead body. The 2 boys rushed home and told their parents, and they immediately called the police, and the body was then recovered. The dead man was Chen Liu, and his corpse had been tied up with electrical wire and wrapped in a carpet before being dumped in the river. He had been dead for around 12 days, and his body was extremely decomposed, especially since his body was in water for that long. An x-ray of his corpse revealed extremely disturbing injuries. Embedded in his face, neck, and skull were 34 nails, all shot from a high-powered nail gun. Looking at this image, I can't help but wonder what order the nails went in. How much time before each nail was shot? The first few nails were likely done as torture, and the rest was just the murderer finishing him off. And the crazy thing is, after 15 years, the killer who did this is still out there and quite possibly doing this to more people. This is just disturbing, and what an awful way to go.
Wheelie bin murderer. In Surrey in 2019, one Friday morning, it was bin day. The bin men came along and tried to remove one of the bins from outside one of the houses. However, they noticed how heavy it was and they just simply couldn't remove it. When the landlord comes by 3 weeks later, he actually notices a human foot sticking out of the bin. Melanie Wallner, a 30-year-old South African woman, had been living at the house. She'd met a German man called Peter, and the two started dating and actually got married fairly quickly. However, the marriage was far from perfect, and it was claimed that Peter had many affairs. In 2006, Melanie found out about Peter's latest affair and confronted him about it. After an apparent argument, Melanie popped her sleep mask on and tried to get some rest. Peter then, while Melanie is completely unaware and defenseless, actually hits her around the head with a heavy griddle pan. He then put a plastic bag over her head and hid her body in a sleeping bag. He immediately went online and ordered a large lockable freezer. This is where he would eventually keep Melanie's body. He told neighbours that they had simply split up and she'd left the country. To her friends and family, however, he told them that there had been a terrible accident. He tried to do CPR, but unfortunately she passed away. When Melanie's parents tried to come to the UK, presumably to go to a funeral to say goodbye to their daughter, Peter insisted they didn't come. He even travelled to South Africa to see her parents and took an urn with him and said that he'd had her cremated. It turned out the urn was just filled with ash from his barbecue. Peter actually got away with this for 3 years until he wanted to move out of the property. He decided to place Melanie in a wheelie bin and hoped that the bin men would just take her and put her in landfill. Luckily, because the bin men refused to take the bin, Melanie was discovered. Peter tried to claim to police that he'd done this in self-defense. Obviously, the fact that she was wearing a sleep mask showed she was completely defenseless, and this was not a self-defense attack. Peter was given life in prison.
The next story was from my aunt, my great aunt to be specific. I want you guys to let me know what you guys think. If you guys think she saw the devil, or I don't know what it is, bro.
The devil?
So recently, my great aunt from Mexico is visiting, and she's staying with my other aunt. It was one of those nights where they were just chilling, talking, having fun. And she said that around 12 is when everybody started going to the rooms to sleep. When she was getting close to knocking out, she said that she started hearing horses outside the window, walking on the road. She was like, horses? There's no fucking horses around here. I didn't see no fucking horses around here. Mind you, they live in the suburbs.
There's no horses around yet.
So she gets up quietly and then she looks out the window and she sees nothing. So she lays back down, tries to go to sleep again. But this time, she ends up hearing the front door open. And then she hears somebody coming up the stairs slowly. And at that point, she gets up from the couch slowly, but like she's just listening to see if somebody will come up the stairs, and she'll see somebody come up from the stairs. But she doesn't. And she starts walking to the railing slowly. And she says that she was about to look over the railing, but she just had like an overwhelming feeling of dread and being scared. So she just decided not to look over the railing. She ends up going back to the couch, tries to like play it off, saying it's nothing, it's just probably just like the house is old. And then she hears it again, same thing, walking up the stairs, and
The reporter who recorded that video, Kim Dong-chul, was arrested in North Korea after that thing went viral, and he was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor for espionage. And the girl in the video was allegedly found dead a few weeks afterwards, around October 20th, 2010. So Kim was the reporter who actually filmed that interaction on a hidden camera. Obviously, videos from inside North Korea are completely censored. There's almost nothing that shows us the reality of life inside the dictatorship. But this soot-covered woman told Kim that she was working in the fields trying to gather grass to feed rabbits. She also discussed with the reporter that she had lost her home recently, and that she had also lost both of her parents and was living on the streets. She also went on to describe the horrific conditions inside of her home country. And this was shocking for the world to see, because everybody knew that this is what was happening in North Korea, but I don't think up until this point people had visually seen what was happening. Somehow Kim managed to sneak the footage out of North Korea, but like I said, he was eventually arrested and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor, in part because of this video. And this was widely published across the internet. I'm actually going to play the rest of it for you now. It's really hard to watch stuff.
South Yorkshire police are officially investigating the death of U.S. ice hockey player Adam Johnson, who horrifically died during a game on Saturday. Adam was an extremely talented hockey player who recently began playing for the Nottingham Panthers for the 2023-2024 season. On Saturday, the Panthers were playing against the Sheffield Steelers at the Utilita Arena in England. During the second period, Adam suffered a serious neck injury after colliding with Matt Petgrave, a Steelers player. Everyone in the arena witnessed the incident, and it was also caught on video, which I do not recommend watching out of respect for Adam's family. It's incredibly graphic, and I wish that I didn't see it. Adam briefly stood up, bleeding profusely out of his neck. He did manage to skate off the ice with the help of a teammate, but he ultimately collapsed again. His teammates tried to help him, but he was rushed to the hospital where doctors tried to get him through surgery, but they couldn't stop the bleeding, and he ultimately died. The arena was immediately evacuated, and the game was suspended after Adam was rushed to the hospital. The police have recently stated that although its officers have now left the scene, the investigation remains ongoing, and it will take time due to the complex nature of this tragic incident. They said that with any unexpected or sudden deaths, it's standard practice to fully investigate the circumstances and report their findings to the coroner. The English Ice Hockey Association has since stated that starting December 31st, neck guards will become mandatory for player safety. In the meantime, they are strongly recommended, but they do understand that there will likely be some anticipated supply issues. There's been a major uproar on social media where many believe that Matt's kick was intentional, while many others, including a few of Adam's teammates, think that this was a horrific freak accident and they don't blame Matt for the incident. According to an international sports lawyer, from a theoretical standpoint, Matt could be prosecuted, but from a practical standpoint, it's not super likely, as officials would have to find sufficient evidence that the kick was intentional and that this was more than just a freak accident. But overall, Adam's family just wants this to be investigated properly. I mean, after all, we have seen this happen time and time again. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio that's organized by the Nottingham Panthers Ice Hockey Club. All of the donations will go to supporting local charitable activities in Hibbing, Minnesota, which was Adam's hometown. Rest in peace, Adam Johnson.
This pedophile country music artist took his own life before he could be arrested. Meet Daniel Lee Martin, a somewhat famous name in the country music world and a reality TV show host. So Daniel Lee Martin started his country music career in the 1990s. And back then, he actually found pretty big success. He opened for acts like Willie Nelson, the Charlie Daniels Band, and he released 2 solo albums. People seemed to be really into his music, and he seemed like a star on the rise. A lot of people remember Charlie opening up for bigger acts, like I said, Charlie Daniels. Here he is pictured here doing that. And you can see here's some merch of his from all the way back in the 90s. Daniel Lee Martin was also a reality TV show host. His shows Brotherhood Outdoors and Backstage on the Backroads aired on the Sportsman's Channel. And yeah, needless to say, this dude had a pretty high profile in the public eye. But in 2018, Daniel Lee Martin would be indicted in Tennessee for some disturbing crimes. These included 4 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor, 2 counts of aggravated sexual battery. I hate the way I have to say that, but that's TikTok's rule. 2 counts of solicitation of a minor to grape a child, 2 counts of indecent exposure, and 1 count of solicitation of a minor. So needless to say, Daniel Lee Martin behind the scenes was twisted. Disturbingly, his victims' ages ranged from 9 to 12 years old. So that happened in 2018, and then in 2019, he was arrested again in Florida. This time, the victim, who was under the age of 16, stated that while she was sitting on a couch next to Daniel, he exposed himself, he used lotion to do, you know what I'm talking about, and he showed her some very graphic videos. This happened several times when the victim was staying overnight at Daniel's house. Obviously, this was very disgusting and disturbing and put a massive stop on his country music career and his reality TV show career. So on February 14th, Valentine's Day 2020, a SWAT team went to Daniel's home in Florida to execute this arrest warrant. And when they entered his home, they discovered that Daniel Lee Martin had taken his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This is a really disturbing story, and I think it's easy to say that this guy was pure evil.
Why did it take nearly 3 weeks to report this little girl missing? 11-year-old Madalena Kojokari was last seen at 4:59 p.m. on security footage getting off of her school bus outside of her home in Cornelius, North Carolina. She hasn't been seen or heard from since. Madalena lives with her mom, 37-year-old Diana, and her stepdad, 60-year-old Christopher Palmeter. She wasn't reported missing until December 15th, nearly 3 weeks after she was last seen, and the details surrounding that are incredibly infuriating. A school resource officer at Bailey Middle School, where Madalena attended, visited the family home on December 12th, concerned about her whereabouts after she failed to show up to school. According to them, no one answered, so they left a truancy packet on the doorstep. 2 days later, a school counselor called Diana wanting to set up a meeting about Madalena's attendance. Diana told them that she would be bringing Madalena to school the next day. However, that never happened. Finally, on December 15th, Diana went to the school and told the resource officer that she actually didn't know where Madalena was and hadn't seen her since November 22nd. Prior to this, she had not once reported this to the police. A massive search began that day, but Madalena is still missing. Her parents, Diana and Christopher, were arrested on the 17th of December and charged with failure to report the disappearance of a child to law enforcement. The two of them remain in jail as the investigation continues. When asked why she waited so long to report her daughter missing, Diana stated she felt it would cause conflict between her and Madalena's stepdad. She also said that she believed he put the family in danger. Diana has since changed her story of when she last saw Madalena a few times, but she is currently sticking with November 23rd. She told authorities that she and Christopher fought that night. Christopher told authorities that he left town to Michigan on the evening of November 23rd to pick up items, and at that point hadn't seen Madalena for a week prior. However, Diana disagreed and told authorities that Christopher actually left for Michigan on the 24th, and that when she went to Madalena's room at 11:30 that morning, she wasn't there. Christopher returned home on November 26th, and from that day forward, they both stated that they didn't know where Madalena was at, but that they accused each other of hiding her. Even so, they failed to report her missing at that time. Police fully believe that Madalena's parents are not telling them everything they know. They've also been focused on and investigating a fire pit in the family's backyard. If you have any information on the disappearance of Madalena Kojokari, please contact the Cornelius Police Department at 704-892-7773.
This OF model allegedly murdered her boyfriend in 2022. This is the story of Courtney Clement. So before all of this went down, Courtney was a famous model on the internet, if you know what I mean. She had a large OF page, and she frequently posted her travels around the world funded by her own endeavors online. She was also really into fitness and entered a lot of fitness competitions in the past. So at the time of this murder, Courtney had about 2 million followers on Instagram, like she was a full-on famous influencer. And at some point in her journey, Courtney met this guy, Christian Obumseli. They started dating, and it seemed like they had a really good relationship from the outside if you were somebody to just follow their social media. But friends and family knew there was a darkness lurking beneath the surface of the couple. They were fighting, they were always, doing things to each other. And this would all come to a head in April of 2022. So initially, when the police were called to the couple's apartment in April of 2022, they found Courtney in there covered in her boyfriend's blood, holding his bloody body. This is how her hands looked upon her arrest. And yeah, she was obviously very distraught, but she initially claimed that she had stabbed her boyfriend in self-defense. And this is the angle that Courtney's lawyers have been going for the entire time since her arrest, that because of their relationship and the domestic violence that was happening in the relationship, Courtney had to stab her boyfriend because he had been attacking her that night. But then, when the charges were announced against Courtney, prosecutors released this damning video from the elevator in their apartment complex, which clearly shows Courtney beating the hell out of her boyfriend, Christian. I mean, that full video is online, and it is very clear that Christian is trying to de-escalate the situation, and Courtney will not let whatever's happening go and is just wailing on him. Now, Courtney's lawyers, in preparing for the trial, have said that they've identified a couple of times when police have been involved in the disputes between the couple, and they claim that it's going to show that Christian was an aggressor towards Courtney. But Christian's family and attorneys obviously are claiming that Christian was the victim here of domestic violence. And on that day, when Courtney stabbed him in the chest and sliced open one of his arteries, which caused him to die, she was the only one attacking anybody in the apartment. So I'm really curious to see how this trial is going to pan out, and when we get some sort of an update on this, I will be sure to let you guys know what's happening.
What would you do if you found out you were dating a serial killer? This case proves you really should listen to red flags. It was the 1980s in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. Sherry Hobson was dating Bruce Lindahl. Now, although she did notice some red flags and some concerning elements to his behavior, she had no idea of what he was capable of. Sherry was worried about Bruce's temper. She was aware he could fly into a rage. She also noticed that he could be really rough with her when the pair were getting intimate. She recalls frequently waking up after they'd spent the night together, feeling really groggy and disorientated. She would eventually have to come to terms with the fact that he would drug her, assault innocent victims, and kill people. Bruce had been on a hideous crime spree in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He'd actually been classed as a prime suspect in multiple murders and Rs. We know for a fact he killed at least 4 people. In 1979, he lured a 20-year-old woman, Annette Lazar, to his house under the pretense of selling her substances. He actually had a far more sinister plan. He held her at gunpoint and R'd her. Shockingly, he was never actually charged for this crime due to Annette's substance issues. He was then free to continue attacking helpless victims. He was known to have assaulted a 30-year-old. Then in 1981, he was hacking victims' phones in order to extort money out of them. At one point, he was found in the car with an unconscious woman with a gaping wound on her head. When officers pulled him over and asked what he was doing, he said that he was just on his way to hospital. However, he was going the complete opposite direction to the hospital. The ambulance took her there and discovered that she'd actually been SA'd. Frustratingly, due to the fact that the woman had been knocked unconscious, she really couldn't provide much information as to what had happened to her, and he was set free. In 1979, 16-year-old Pamela Mora was brutally murdered. She'd been to her friend's house and then had left to go and get McDonald's. Tragically, not long later, her body was found strangled and R'd. Now, although this murder actually went unsolved for decades, in 1993 DNA evidence proved that Bruce was her killer. Then another 16-year-old vanished. This time it was Deborah McCall. Now, police searched Bruce's apartment and tellingly found Deborah's picture. However, her body was never found and Bruce was never charged in her disappearance. On the 23rd of June 1980, Bruce snatched Deborah Colander, aged 25. She'd been in a car park in Aurora, Illinois. He R'd her and then let her free and then was arrested. Now, he actually paid his bail and was set free while awaiting trial. Tragically, before the trial actually happened, months later, Deborah vanished. Now, obviously, she was the key witness in this case, so Bruce definitely had a motive to want her gone. 2 years later, her body was discovered, and a man contacted police to say that Bruce had actually tried to offer him money to kill Deborah. Shortly after this, on the 4th of April 1981, Bruce was visiting Naperville. He bumped into Chuck Huber Jr. and Chuck was 18 at the time. The pair ended up playing bowling together and Bruce then invited Chuck back to his house afterwards to have some drinks. When they got to the destination, Bruce stabbed Chuck 28 times. However, Chuck was not going down without a fight. He resisted and in doing so actually caused Bruce to stab himself in the thigh. This severed a main artery and caused Bruce to bleed out. Both Chuck and Bruce were found dead at the scene. Finally, Bruce's horrific crime spree was over.
I'm getting jiggy with a rifle. I'll pull the trigger with my eyes closed.
This TikToker known as Snow the Salt Queen and Yandere Freak killed her own friend, and she pretty much got away with it. So this is the real Snow the Salt Queen, Mary Ann Oliver Snow. And in January of 2021, she was involved in a tragic shooting. So before all of this went down, Snow the Salt Queen had a massive profile on TikTok with almost 2 million followers. She was constantly posting lip-syncing content, cosplay content, sort of similar to this.
Nobody likes me, everybody hates me, they want me to go eat some more.
Basically videos that were big on TikTok from 2020 to 2021, that kind of era. But this story took a dramatic twist when on January 16th, 2021, Mary, aka Snow the Salt Queen, and 7 of her friends were hosting a watch party for a Batman TV show inside of this house in Houston, Texas. So here's how this all allegedly went down. So at one point during the night, the whole group had been drinking Cokes with vodka. They had been making videos to post on social media, and Mary went out to the garage and retrieved a Glock handgun. Now, according to people that were there, Mary boasted that this gun was almost like the gun that the villain the Penguin has in the Batman movies. And she pretended to shoot one of her friends, pulled the trigger, and for some reason the trigger clicked and the gun didn't go off. But that's when 18-year-old Helen Rose Hastings allegedly, according to Mary, said, "Shoot me." So according to Mary, they were joking around, so she walked over to Helen, placed the pistol right up to her head, and pulled the trigger. Now, according to Mary, she thought that the gun was unloaded, but when she pulled the trigger with the gun up to Helen's forehead, it fired. Now, obviously, this bullet blew through Helen's forehead and she died in the hospital 2 days later. Obviously, Mary was then brought in by the authorities. Now, according to the people that were there who came rushing into the room after the shooting, they all said that this was completely unintentional, this was an accident, but the family of Helen actually thinks that there may have been some sort of evil motive behind the shooting. They've gone on the record and said that their daughter would never ask anybody to shoot her. She's even suggested that Mary and the other people that were there at the party may have had time to actually get their stories straight before calling the police, so they had one narrative that ran through the night. But regardless, after that party, a person was dead. And shortly afterwards, Snow the Salt Queen started posting to their social media again with a lot of tasteless images. This is actually one of the images that Mary posted after the murder, which shows bloody handprints on a wall behind her. So there's no real resolution in this case yet. Mary has been charged with manslaughter, but I couldn't find anything about a verdict or any developments in this case really since it made the headlines back in 2021. So I'll update you guys if something happens in this case.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Take you to join a cult.
This fully reminds me of a story I read about a guy that joined a doomsday cult by accident. A few years ago, a guy, Alex, was studying law in Australia when he was approached by 2 men in suits on campus. They told him they needed to interview international students for a study they were doing. Alex does the study, and the guys are really nice, and Alex doesn't really have any friends on campus, so they ask him to coffee later, and he accepts. So on the day they're supposed to meet for coffee, the 2 guys end up bringing this, other woman along. And they're all hanging out, but she starts talking about these classes that she's been taking. She's raving about these classes, and the guys have also taken these classes, and they're like, "Alex, you have to do these classes with us." So when he shows up to take the class with them, it turns out it's a 9-month commitment, and you have to go 3 times a week. Also, it's a full-on Bible study. But Alex was raised Christian, and he also doesn't want to lose these friends, so he's like, whatever, I'll take these classes with you. But then, a few months into these classes, his friends start saying weird things to him, like, "Oh, your parents are under the control of Satan, you should probably not talk to them anymore." Alex gets a weird vibe, he ends up Googling it, and it turns out he fully joined Shincheonji, which is a high-control religious group based in South Korea.
Took a bullet to the head in broad daylight while serving as the President of the United States. I am John F. Kennedy, and here is the account of the curse that befell my family. I was born in 1917 into a wealthy and influential family. My father, Joseph Kennedy, had grand ambitions for us, his children. However, shortly after I assumed the presidency as the 35th President of the United States, misfortune began to plague my family. My elder brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., was killed during World War II. My sister Kathleen perished in a plane crash. And then came that fateful day in 1963, when I was assassinated in broad daylight in Dallas. But the curse did not end there. My brother Robert was assassinated in 1968 while campaigning for the presidency. My other brother Edward survived a plane crash in 1964, but was involved in a tragic car accident in 1969, resulting in the death of a young woman. And the list goes on. My nephew, John F. Kennedy Jr., lost his life in a plane crash in 1999. My sister Rosemary lived a tragic life after a lobotomy. The curse of the Kennedy family seems to have no end.
I don't understand how an argument over breadcrumbs can cause someone to do something so heinous to someone else. 35-year-old Dimitri Furcano stabbed his girlfriend, 28-year-old Erica Preti, to death after she called him out for leaving breadcrumbs on their hotel bed. In 2017, they were on vacation in San Teodoro when on one of those nights, Dimitri attacked Erica and stabbed her 57 times. Dimitri was originally sentenced to 30 years in prison, but what happened next, no one saw coming. You see, when Dimitri was sentenced in 2018, he weighed about 260 pounds. Then from 2022 to 2023, Dimitri gained 200 pounds and now weighs about 450 pounds. So because of his health and the horrible diet served in prison, Dimitri was recently released after only serving 5 years. The court ruled that the food in the prison could end up killing him, so he had to get out. And get this, Dimitri will serve the rest of his sentence under house arrest at his parents' home near Milan, where he can get access to a healthy diet. So this is a slap in the face to the victim's family. But keep in mind, this happened in Italy, so I'm guessing the laws over there are a little bit more lenient. So do you guys think his release was valid, or should he have been kept there for the remaining of his sentence?
Killed more than 33 young men. I was nicknamed the Killer Clown. My name is John Wayne Gacy. I had a particularly difficult childhood because of my father, who was a very violent and authoritarian man. At the age of 9, I was raped by a person I thought was my friend. I then left school very early and immediately joined the Navy. But I quickly stopped and changed several jobs. I even had my own construction company. And that's how I attracted young men, by promising them jobs before committing the worst. I also worked in a funeral home. I quickly took a liking to it, and this experience contributed to fuel my fascination for death and the macabre. I had 2 children in the meantime, and I got married. I was innocent and benevolent in appearance towards everyone, but unfortunately I had murderous impulses. To satisfy these impulses, I used my clown costume to sexually assault them, rape them, and bury my victims at home without anyone suspecting me of where my nickname of Killer Clown came from. This lasted for many years, until the police finally suspected me because of a foul smell reported by the neighbors. I was then arrested. I pretended that I was crazy and that everything I did was due to madness, but I was arrested in 1978 and sentenced to death in 1994, and that's how the nightmare I inflicted on many people ended.
You will genuinely never guess what happened after this man was kidnapped by armed, masked men. Rogelio Anderverdi was 34 and from Edinburgh, Texas. At 10:30 p.m. on the 1st of October 2013, a terrifying event would unfold. Rogelio was at home with his wife when suddenly 2 masked men with guns barged through the door. They dragged the man from the property and forced him into the back of a van. His wife was understandably hysterical and called police immediately as the masked men disappeared with her husband. Now, police officers headed out in force and even had a police helicopter scouring the area for any sign of him. However, they had no luck and police became suspicious as Rogelio had no criminal history or links to any gangs of any kind. After several hours, the search was called off. 2 days later, to his wife's shock, Rogelio walked through the door. He told her that his kidnappers had shown him mercy and simply set him free. Now, obviously, the police were following up on this case and they questioned him. Eventually, Rogelio had to tell the truth. He had staged a fake kidnapping between him and his friends so that he could go on a night out. He said that he simply wanted to spend time with his friends and party. He was eventually charged with making a false report to police and released on $5,000 bail.
That was the shocking footage of 21-year-old Angel Lynn being kidnapped in broad daylight by her boyfriend, Che Buskill. She was thrown inside the van and then driven down the A6, and at 60 miles an hour, she was pushed from the van and suffered a catastrophic head injury. She was found by a passerby and rushed to hospital. Angel suffered a fractured skull and a catastrophic brain injury, from which she might never recover. She was left unable to walk, talk, or feed herself. Che was arrested and charged with kidnap, coercive and controlling behaviour, and perverting the course of justice. It couldn't be proven that he'd pushed Angel from the van, and he received 7.5 years. This was later extended to 12 years. The driver of the van was also sentenced to 21 months. Angel, on the other hand, has a life sentence after doctors have told her mum that she's unlikely to ever recover from her brain injury. It's now a couple of years on and Angel's mum said she is able to communicate slightly. She still can't walk or talk, but uses a communication machine, and she can understand everything that's being said to her. When she puts her cheek against her daughter's lips, Angel purses her lips to give her a kiss. She hopes one day that she'll be able to communicate enough to tell everybody what actually happened on that fateful day.
This Derbyshire crime case is horrific. Police were called to a house in Killamarsh in 2021. It was 7:26 a.m. on the 19th of September. What they were told when they arrived stunned them. Outside was Damien Bendel. He chillingly told police that he'd murdered 4 people inside of the house. He was arrested at the scene, and what officers discovered would haunt them. 35-year-old Terry Harris had lived in the house along with her children, 13-year-old John Paul Bennett and 11-year-old Lacey Bennett. Also deceased inside the property was Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who'd been there for a sleepover. Damien and Terry had been in a relationship after meeting on a dating website. Prior to the murders, and this is a massive, massive trigger warning for animals here, Damien had bragged that a friend couldn't afford to take their dog to the vet, so he'd killed it using a brick. He was a known substance user and used a lot of CO and CA. On the day in question, the 4 victims were found deceased in a house with their skulls crushed. He had AR'd 11-year-old Lacey as she died. After the killings, he went to town to get more substances and was spotted on CCTV going to a shop to buy tobacco. He took John Paul's Xbox and traded it in for substances. When making polite conversation with Damien, a cab driver reported that he told him his night had been a bit mad. He was given a whole life order in prison, and the house has since been demolished.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all remember the devastating tsunami that hit Japan on March 11th, 2011. But the footage I'm about to show you, you've probably never seen. This is super rare footage of the tsunami that day, and it's absolutely crazy. Just look how quick and destructive the water is. It's absolutely terrifying.
You'd never think that these are the faces of 2 12-year-old killers, but that's exactly what they are. Jake Eakin and Evan Savoy were 12 years old and lived in the small town of Ephrata in Washington. They were described by parents as soft-spoken and nice boys. On February 15, 2003, they decided to go and call on another boy to see if he wanted to come out and play. Nobody could have predicted the horror that they were planning. Craig Sauger, 13, was at home with his mum when the 2 boys knocked on the door. His mum answered and was surprised to see them standing on the doorstep. Craig didn't get invited out to play much. He was on the spectrum and didn't really get included with the other boys. She happily let him go out to play but told him to come back before it got dark. As night fell, Craig's mum began to get worried and she decided to go out and look for her son. She called on Jake and Evan's parents and found that they were both already home. They said that they'd left Craig in the park and that he was going to walk home by himself. She headed to the park and to her horror, she found her son's lifeless body buried under a pile of leaves. She called for an ambulance, but it was already too late. Craig was dead. Jake and Evan's story was that Craig was climbing a tree when he fell. They freaked out and ran home and left him there by himself. The next day, after finding blood on the boy's shoes, the parents turned them into police. Craig's autopsy showed multiple stab wounds, 5 to his chest and torso, and 34 to his head and neck. Both of the 12-year-old boys were arrested and tried for Craig's murder. They were treated as adults in court due to the severity of the crime. They became the youngest murder defendants in the state to be tried as adults since 1931. Jake testified against Evan and said that it was him that had told Craig to bend down and count to 10 before dropping a massive rock on his neck. He then began stabbing him, and it was then that Jake joined in with the murder. Jake was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison, and Evan was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years. The shocking thing about this story is that both boys were released in 2020 and are now grown men and are married and living normal lives.
These are people who have gone missing in 2023. This is Joshua Amos, who is 32 years old. He has been missing since March 19th, 2023 after leaving a strip club in Washington Park, Illinois. His mother, Christine Simpson, said his disappearance is something that Joshua just wouldn't do. He was seen on video leaving Scarlet Strip Club on Berkman Road in Washington Park at 5 a.m. on March 19th. Surveillance cameras from a trucking company on Lincoln Avenue captured Joshua's image at 7:28 a.m. that day. The trucking company and the strip club are about 4 miles apart. Illinois State Police and a search dog looked for Joshua on March 24th, but nothing was ever found. His family and friends continue the search to this day, hoping they will find him ever since his disappearance. Up next is Jordan Taylor, and at 4:18 p.m. on January 6, 2023, Jordan Taylor, who is 29, changed his Facebook profile picture to a selfie of him wearing a white mask. Later that day, Jordan went to a barber shop located on Hillside Avenue in Queens, New York, and at 6:48 p.m. he abruptly left in the middle of his haircut, telling his barber that he had to go after receiving a phone call. Jordan was later seen standing outside of the barber shop for 5 to 10 minutes. Around 9 p.m. that same day, phone records show that Jordan went to the Port Authority bus terminal, where he seemingly spent some time up until midnight. On January 7, 2023, phone records tracked Jordan to a location near a club. Between 12:11 a.m. and 1:04 a.m., and around 2:30 a.m., Jordan was last seen on security footage walking by himself near Lower Manhattan. Jordan never returned home and hasn't been found or heard from since. On January 7th, his phone was found near that same club he was at 1:30 a.m. The authorities reviewed the video footage from outside the club he was at, but didn't see Jordan enter or exit the club at any point. And around 9 a.m., his wallet was found, which contained some cash and all of his credit cards. The police also found no evidence of foul play in Jordan's disappearance. His case is currently active and is still ongoing to this day. This might be one of the scariest things that could ever happen to a human, mainly because can you just imagine going missing and nobody ever finding you or talking to you again? I don't know, the thought about that is just terrifying, and hopefully they are found soon.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Do you remember Mark and Debbie Constantino from the show Ghost Adventures? Well, they have a tragic story. Mark and Debbie Constantino were a couple for a long time, and they gained notoriety as a ghost hunting couple. They were really good friends with the Ghost Adventures crew, and thus they were invited out to be a part of episodes and investigations multiple times throughout the Ghost Adventures series. Here are some screenshots of their appearances on the show. Here's Debbie and here's Mark. They were constantly featured on Ghost Adventures, and they were one of the couples that appeared all the time. People knew them. But there was trouble behind the scenes. They actually had a very abusive relationship, and domestic violence was common between the two of them. Earlier in the year that Debbie was murdered, the police were called by Mark because apparently she had slashed him with a butcher knife, but she would never see court. Then just a week or so before the murders happened, Debbie actually called the police because Mark and the couple's daughter had pulled her out of a car, dragged her inside of a home, and beaten her to almost death. Debbie suffered a broken nose and she was afraid for her life, and Mark and his daughter were arrested. And since kidnapping is typically a no-bond charge, which means that you'll be held in jail until your trial, But a local judge made a tragic mistake and let Mark and his daughter out on bond. A week later, the police were called because a woman came home and found that one of her roommates was dead. And her other roommate, Debbie Constantino, Mark's wife, who had moved out of the family home, was missing. Police then tracked Mark's cell phone and found Debbie and Mark holed up inside of an apartment. There was a standoff with SWAT officers. Mark was threatening and yelling things out. And eventually, using explosives, the SWAT team blew open the door to the apartment, where they found Debbie dead and Mark dead as well. He had murdered her and then took his own life. Obviously, this was huge news because the couple was on ghost adventures so frequently. They were mainstays at paranormal conventions. People knew their website and their work. And it made a lot of people question, was this some sort of darkness that was brought on by paranormal investigating? I personally don't think so. I think that it just had to do with some sort of mental illness and obviously deep issues with domestic abuse and all of that. But either way, it's such a tragic situation. But if you like true crime and you like murder stories, go listen to the podcast I co-host, my fiance, Murder in America. We just covered a brutal murder story from New Orleans, Louisiana, one of our favorite murder stories. The link is in my bio. You can listen for free on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we've actually been trending lately. Thanks to everybody who's been listening and tuning in. We appreciate you all so much. And obviously that was a tragic story that I just told you guys. So RIP to Debbie Constantino and the other roommate who was killed, who still, I believe, remains unnamed.
This 19-year-old boy ate a slug and was then paralyzed for 8 years. This is 19-year-old rugby player from Sydney, Sam Ballard. And he contracted rat lungworm disease and spent 8 long years paralyzed before dying in November 2018. Sam Ballard was a promising 19-year-old rugby player, and he was enjoying a weekend together with his friends in 2010, when he made a random decision that would prove fatal. All of them had a little bit of red wine that night, and his friend Jimmy Galvin said a typical garden slug crawled out in front of them. And in a moment of teenage stupidity, perhaps influenced by the wine, Sam Ballard was there to eat the slug, and at first everything seemed fine. The friends carried on as usual. But within a few days' time, Sam began to complain of severe pain in his legs. Then he started vomiting and experiencing dizzy spells. When his conditions worsened and he fell weak, his mother rushed him to the hospital. Nobody could have predicted that that hospital visit would result in a 400-day-long coma that would paralyze Ballard for 8 years, and would end up eventually killing him. When they first arrived at the hospital, Sam Ballard's mother, Katie, feared that Sam might have multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected his father, but doctors assured that that was not the case. Sam then turned to his mother and said that he had eaten a slug, and she said no one gets sick from that. But as it turned out, Sam Ballard had indeed gotten very, very sick from it. Sam Ballard had become infected with rat lungworm disease, a condition caused by a parasitic worm usually found in rodents, though it can transfer to slugs and snails if they eat the rodent's feces. And when Sam Ballard ate the live slug, it transferred to him. When a human ingests rat lungworm larvae, they penetrate the inner lining of the intestinal tract and work their way into the liver and lungs, then into the central nervous system. In most instances, rat lungworm disease causes only mild symptoms, if any, and most people who contract the illness recover within a matter of days or weeks. However, there are those rare instances where the symptoms are much more severe, and that was the case with Sam Ballard. According to the University of Hawaii, humans are a dead-end host for lungworms, meaning the parasites don't reproduce in humans, but they do get lost in the central nervous system, or even move into the eye chamber until they die. And the presence of these parasites can cause severe brain, spinal cord, and nerve damage. And in the case of Sam Ballard, this damage induced a coma that left him bound to a wheelchair and unable to eat without a tube. After Sam woke up from his 420-day-long coma, he was completely paralyzed and he now required 24-hour care 7 days a week. He was prone to seizures, unable to go to the bathroom without help or control his body temperature. He spent 3 years in the hospital before being released, just able to operate a motorized wheelchair. But unfortunately, the seemingly endless health complications Sam Ballard faced over the course of 8 years took their toll, and he sadly passed away in November 2018. And Sam Ballard's final words to his mother were, "I love you." This case of Sam Ballard is just extremely sad and honestly unlucky. From what was a harmless prank turned into a nightmare of a life for Sam Ballard. I feel so bad for him and his family, and may he rest in peace.
On the morning of August 26, 2015, a TV journalist and her cameraman were murdered by a gunman live on air. This is the tragic story of the murders of Allison Parker and Adam Ward. So Allison Parker and Adam Ward were employees of the CBS affiliate WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia. They had both been working for the news station for a number of years, and tragically, Adam Ward actually graduated from Virginia Tech. If you don't remember, Virginia Tech was the site of one of the largest school shootings in American history. On that morning, Allison and Adam were covering a story about the 50th anniversary of a lake. At the time, they were interviewing a woman named Vicki Gardner talking about the upcoming plans for celebration. As Allison was conducting the interview, though, a man approached from behind. This man quickly brandished a pistol, and in the actual news footage, you can hear the sound of about 8 shots firing, followed by Allison screaming and the camera shot going dead. They then cut back to the actual people in the studio, and they were confused. They said, "Oh, we don't know what that was. Maybe it was a car backfiring or some shots fired in the background, but we'll get back to them in a second." What they didn't know, though, was that when Adam Ward dropped the camera, they caught this image of the shooter. And shockingly, people knew who he was. This is Vester Lee Flanagan II, the murderer behind these atrocious murders, and he himself was a TV reporter. Vester Flanagan had actually been employed by the same TV station that Allison and Adam worked at, even though when he was hired, he decided to go by the professional name of Bryce Williams. In the past, he had been involved with lawsuits with other broadcasting agencies, and people who had worked with Vester in the past knew him to be a volatile and somewhat dangerous individual. And that led to the year 2013 when Vester was fired from the news station that Allison and Adam worked at. He had been there less than a year, but other employees reported feeling extremely uncomfortable around him. On the day that he was fired, Vester didn't take the news so well, and when he was told he was being let go, he lashed out at employees and got violent. The police then had to escort Vester out of the building, and it's been reported that future victim Adam Ward actually videotaped this whole thing going down, and that later in the day, Adam and Vester got into a heated argument. So back to the shooting. After that eerie footage was broadcast, people began to worry about Allison and Adam. And when the police were called to the scene, they discovered that they both were dead. Vicki Gardner, the woman that was interviewed, was actually alive, and she was able to relate everything that had happened to the police. Like I said, when people from the news station went back and looked through that live broadcast footage, they recognized the man as Vester Flanagan. And thus, a massive statewide manhunt began for this guy. Authorities were also able to tell that he was the shooter because he had uploaded that eerie first-person perspective clip of him committing the murders to his Facebook at around 11 a.m. that morning. So the police tracked Vester down, they found the rental car that he had rented, and after a high-speed pursuit, he took his own life in the vehicle. Vester, before his death, had actually sent a letter to the news station, and in the letter, he talked about how he was sick of racial discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace. He felt that he was so angry from the Charleston church shooting that he wanted to do something, and he even claimed that he admired people like Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris from Columbine. So obviously, this guy was messed up in the head. He was a disgruntled ex-employee who was fed up with what he saw as the ways of the world, and that led him to commit an atrocious act of violence. Now, I don't recommend you looking up the footage of this happening, but it is out there, and the news stations actually posted some of this back in the day when it all went down. Rest in peace to Allison Parker and Adam Ward, obviously, and I think that this is going to go down in history as one of the strangest murders to ever happen in America.
This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 p.m. and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released.